addiction, that I'm addicted to. And in popular language, people just throw around this term because we are actually biologically wired for it. Survival by the time in procreation and eating, two best examples. Artificial intelligence is integrated into those these days. Understand their drives, their backgrounds on a deeper level, childhood traumas and things like that. It's very important to know how to work with that. Very serious drinking problem.
Today, I have an extraordinary guest at the Energy Lab podcast, Henrietta Szutorisz. Henrietta is a biomedical scientist and entrepreneur with more than 20 years of international experience in various fields such as virology, cancer, developmental biology, stem cell research, neuroscience, and behavioral studies.
So behavior is not something esoteric. No, behavioral choices and the actual processes are caused by physiological mechanisms in the body. Habits develop via many cycles of repetition. Change needs to go through that as well. We need to unlearn the old habits and the different components and learn new ways of coping and behaving. But something that is already established, that's there already, and that tends to be stronger. Everything that is established and something the new experience.
Henrietta is specialized in how our brain and genes change and adapt due to experiences, particularly during early development. She uses her knowledge to study issues like addiction and mental health and has been recognized for her work, which has been published in well-known journals, and often shares as well her findings at scientific events.
And we know that people who have that background, very often they have an increased vulnerability to addictions. There is really no distinction between mental and physical choices we make. Decision-making, cognitive processes. So now the technology helps a lot. We just have to be very mindful of how we use that. Technology is an empty space that we don't know how to cope with and, in the everyday, and that at the same time be healthy.
Welcome, Henrietta, to the Energy Lab podcast.
Hello, Kathy. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm so glad to be here, and also because I very highly value your work. So hopefully we can discuss how I work, different aspects of our work complement.
Same. I was looking forward to this, and we have so many very interesting, also important topics. So I'm super excited to go through a few questions that I prepared for you today. Last time we talked about addiction, and it's a lot of topics you're also very, very involved and working into, and from my side as well, partially from a different perspective. So I'm very curious to know how you define addiction, and if you can talk about it when it comes down to food, or if there are any specific topics related to addiction and sugar. If there's anything you want to highlight, I'd love to start with it.
Of course. So usually the simplest and most effective definition of addiction is that addiction is a chronic relapsing condition characterized by compulsive seeking of an experience in spite of its negative consequences. So what is very important to emphasize here is that the compulsive part, it's usually many cycles of repetitions. That's why we speak about addiction cycles. And then people try to stop, but they are unable, despite the effects and many different negative effects on their life. And so that's also a bit different from how very often in popular language, people just throw around these terms, addiction, that I'm addicted to, my work or running or, anything that is probably not really destroying their lives, but it's just, it's cool. But it's very different from the clinical definition and what real addiction is.
And that's exactly the reason why I want to first to define, because it's used very often as something just to highlight, but actually it's something serious. And I also was researching, am I using it correctly when I talk about, the topic with sugar, for example, because this is the one that it's most urgent for many. And I was going a bit deeper. So I think we need to really pay attention to the kind of words we use. Otherwise, inflating or getting an inflation on such important words, I think it's not helpful for anyone.
Yeah, I
Thank you for the
completely
explanation.
agree. And in terms of the sugar, so I just to make the bridge between, I usually work on and studied and work with drug addiction, substance use disorders. But in terms of so we develop these disorders because we are actually biologically wired for it. So there are the nervous system and how it functions. We have all the mechanisms set in us that make it possible for different experiences to kind of hijack this system. And sugar is a very good example. I know that you work on that. You are very interested in that. And so we basically have this wiring because it's there. It has evolved to facilitate our survival by that time in procreation and eating, two best examples. And eating is one of the most rewarding experiences for normal, natural experiences for people. And sugar is especially powerful because it's not only a pleasant experience, but the sugar itself has physiological effects that can influence the system, the body in different ways that trigger this reward system that is involved in the development of the addiction. And it provides very strong what we call reinforcement. And usually people get into just eating it again and again. It becomes a habit and it's very hard to stop.
And then, yeah, of course, it's the habit topic. And the thing is, sometimes we think about, is it a habit? Is it addiction? Is it too much talking about addiction? But what happens with our brain and all the patterns linked to our ancestors and the survival mode, as you just explained, I think this is key and something that we should be aware to understand, at least why, so that we can better get help, ask for help, or try to help ourselves if it's the case. Thank you for that. Can you explain the role of the biological mechanisms like epigenetics and neuroplasticity in mental health and addiction, so that we got a bit more understanding of the inside topics?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you are interested in this too, because these are the two main areas that I also studied as a neurobiologist for many, many years, and take advantage of the knowledge, the research data in my current work, and how we try to approach recovery. So epigenetics, so what is very important to know about both of these basically group of mechanisms that they can be influenced very strongly by environment and experience. Unlike something, for example, genetics, so which means our DNA that we are born with, and it usually doesn't mutate, doesn't change that much. So this epigenetic mechanism, so it's basically related to the DNA, the genetics. So that's what epi, a Greek word called means above the genome, and this means that these are biological mechanisms that are able to alter how genes function. So they can induce or silence genes, things like that. And so molecular mechanisms in many different ways. And it's very, very important because it's one of the epigenetics is where epigenetic mechanisms have been very, very heavily implicated in the development and maintenance of addiction. That was also one of my main research fields. And neuroplasticity, on the other hand, it's also a subject to environment. But it's not. It's more like a cellular mechanism, so communication between different cells. The definition of that is that neuroplasticity is the ability of the nervous system to change its function, structure, and connections in response to external or internal stimuli. And so it means that any experience, any environment, the most classic example that have been also studied heavily is learning and memory, how that works. It's also important in addiction because, we remember the experience. That's a big part of why we repeat it. And so both of these are in many different ways are involved in both the initiation and the maintenance of addiction. Epigenetics can be both short-term and long-term, can even be as long as intergenerational, can be inherited even across generations from mother to child and so on. Neuroplasticity is more within a lifespan, and it's a cellular network, and it's usually a bit short-term, although some mechanisms can persist for long periods of time. And what is very important is that in the context of, for example, we can take advantage of these mechanisms, because it's not only that that negative experiences can influence them in a negative way, but we can take advantage of how they are so flexible and incorporate them into treatment. So design treatment strategies that specifically target mechanisms. So pharmacological drugs that influence specific molecules, for example, or even psychosocial treatments can influence this. Even something like therapy, psychotherapy, or a community, a social environment.
And among the treatments, among all the treatment, the possibilities that we have today, I know that you are as well involved in the technology used to treat and help as many as possible to overcome addiction. I don't really have the understanding, or I cannot really imagine how it works. If you would explain how technology and also this personalized treatments can improve the mental health, and especially related to addiction and to recovery, how does it look like for someone that is not a specialist and doesn't get the jargon, like simple words?
Yeah, so technology can be many different things. So usually these days when people talk about technology, they usually very often they just mean the digital technologies and social media and all the computer technology, but it's not only that. So there is also related to what we spoke about, epigenetics and mechanism genetics even. So there are technologies to actually study these, and so that's a major field. That's also was a big part of my own research and still my own work. When we can basically these technologies help us understand the system, the whole body, and how it functions in ways that the human individual is not capable of doing. And so it can be, for example, just determining the whole DNA sequence, the epigenome, and studying the epigenome and analyzing. So there are many analytical methods that can help basically generate information, and we can use that information to develop treatments and strategies. And then there is the digital technologies. I'm sure you are interested in that, which is basically people develop these days many different apps and basically you taking advantage of computer science, computer technology platforms, digital platforms where people can just go and educate themselves. And also not only that, but very often artificial intelligence is integrated into those these days, and so that also helps to make it more effective. People can interact with it directly, and it can be an advisor, like a digital advisor, and things like that. In my opinion, the best way is to take advantage of the existence of these different technologies and combine them into treatment. So, for example, analyzing the DNA or the epigenome or but brain imaging technologies and things like that, and then using artificial intelligence and those platforms for people to make it more accessible, so they can use their own and study.
So
And
as a support, right? So something that people do extra, having a guidance of someone working with them, and then extra. So from what you're telling me, it's a lot to do as well with kind of databases of information or patterns that are used, or any other kind of information. At the end, it's all about information. So the technology is not only AI, as you said. We think always about certain things because we use those technologies more than before. But everything is technology that we really today, we don't even think about it, right? Like many technologies that are used, we don't use the right naming sometimes. And what about objective recovery? How is it? What is your approach in that case? You just explain a high level what everything can be use of technology, but what is it exactly objective recovery, and what's the main purpose of your startup?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked this question. So Objective Recovery is one of those digital platforms that we are still building, developing, and the purpose is to help people find the best personalized treatment strategy for their addiction, substance use problem. And the way we approach this is that it's completely private and secure, so it's online, and we have different products that can help people, first of all, understand their drives, their backgrounds on a deeper level that is usually possible just using human consciousness. So we have, for example, a gamified assessment tool that people just, it's like almost like you go and play a video game type of thing, and then without thinking too much, and then we collect data, and using that data, the algorithm that we developed analyzes the data based on engagement of the individual, and then matches them with different treatments, and in the end creates a recovery strategy that the person can either explore on their own if they need privacy, or we can also help and connect them with the appropriate providers. And then in terms of the other technologies, now we are starting to also integrate the use of those biomarkers that I mentioned a bit. So genetic information, epigenetics not yet, but more brain imaging, and even the results of simple blood tests that can be very meaningful to capture the state of someone and what needs to be improved. And the goal is that what we want to achieve is use all these different pieces of information and integrating them into a system that which represents the individual. It's sort of like a digital roadmap of that individual's like person self, digital like a mirror, and then use that information and create again the strategy that is completely unique for everyone and different for everyone.
Is it something which is more holistic than other kind of approach, because you're talking about different pieces of the being and health, that is probably different than the approach that we often have that is very in silos, right? Separating everything and losing a bit the higher view. So it looks like what you're working at, it's creating more high level and better understanding.
It's directly holistic in a way that our goal is not only to target very, very specifically only the addictive behavior. Let's say someone has a drinking problem, but exactly from the assessment, we have an idea that what other background stories and things are associated in the background, in the just underneath as drives for those addictions. And the goal is to tackle all those different things, including the consequences of the addiction. I give you examples. For example, many people have, they come from a difficult early life background, childhood traumas and things like that. It's very important to know how to work with that. Or as a consequence, many people with addiction really make a big mess of their finances. So that's also a part of our goal, is to help people connect them with specialists who understand why a person with addiction creates
and know how to help them, of course,
their lives and helps them, and coaches and therapists and many different things. Lifestyle.
I guess that's most part of what you studied, right? So are you using your academic findings and putting them in practice?
Exactly. So I did not mention, but the original inspiration for objective recovery and even studying addiction for me was my own experience with addiction. So I had a very serious drinking problem, and fortunately many years ago, even when I was much younger, even an eating disorder, which is very similar to addictions. You are interested in sugar, things like that, eating habits, and so it's basically, so I'm motivated by this personal angle, and I can use my personal experience, but also use the results and the knowledge from the academic literature that I decided to dive into for over a decade. And so conceptually and practically, and so as I mentioned, for example, using the biomarkers and physical tests, physiological tests, things like that, and then but the integration of all this together is completely new and unique. So that's why it takes a while to develop as well.
That sounds like something very powerful, Henrietta. And of course, we always start from us because we have better understanding. You went through certain things, and it's most of the case. The understanding comes from going through and then looking for the best solutions. So this is something that has a lot of value. And one of the reasons why it's worth sometimes going through some things, because you can then help other people who are struggling with it.
It's
I have
also,
a
I think
question.
it's,
Tell me.
I like very much this, working on what troubled us in the past and the problems that we successfully resolved in a good case, because it tends to be much more motivating for an individual, personal background, personal experience than something that is more like impersonal, like, I used to work, for example, on cancer, very important problems for society, but I could never connect with that as much as I can with mental health and addiction.
That's linked to the personal pursuit or purpose, better to say, right? Because if you have as first the root cause to help yourself and go through things, then it becomes almost, I mean, not everybody going through something needs to then become a specialist of that. Otherwise, it would be probably unbalanced in terms of, professions and people able. But if you have that chance and that calling, then that's definitely the best. What about the method? What do you use a certain method for addiction recovery? Especially, I'm thinking about, is it the same for everyone, or if we use technology like in addiction recovery, does it change from person to person? I guess it must be personalized somehow, right?
So that's an excellent question. I love this question because it's actually a problem as well, that in principle it would be so nice to have something universal, right? So it's, a universal cure. Unfortunately, there are still traditional, more old-fashioned methods and providers, treatment providers who believe that their methods that they developed or they studied and they know that will work for everyone, and that's what they keep using. I can mention, for example, there are psychotherapy modalities like that in addiction recovery, 12-step programs. Very often they have this philosophy that it will be good for everyone if they do it. It's even like judgmental a bit if it's not working for someone because it's personally not suitable. Very often they blame the individual, they don't engage enough, and they don't do it well enough. So I am a huge advocate for personalized, individualized solutions, because I think that's the only way to go. And even psychiatry as a discipline of medicine, very, very different. Psychiatry is very inefficient compared to other areas of medicine, such as, let's say, cardiology. That is, with today's technology, those technologies make it possible to really cure diseases sometimes very fast with minimally invasive procedures. Psychiatry and, mental health, it's still not the case. And the main reason is because we still have not figured out the personalization, which is not, it takes a while. But at the same time, it's always good to have something that is a relatively standard, standard procedure. That's why we also have that assessment in objective recovery, the behavioral assessment, which is the same, basically tool for everyone, but the experience will be completely unique because they create that experience. So that's how it becomes personal.
That makes sense. I mean, each of us is so different. Each of us is a different world. And thinking of an approach that is the same for everyone, I think then probably we wouldn't even have the problem. If there would be a solution that would be same for everybody, we would be optimized for a system that works for everyone. But as you said, it's good to have a frame of, especially for assessment. I think it's the same for when we talk about in general wellness and things that are good for people to for personal development, but for treatment, and it's even more crucial to have something which is really going to the uniqueness of each problem, each person, so thank you for this explanation. Any way that you can outline the behavior change, what works from a neuroscientific perspective? Like, I always heard about it, but I don't know exactly how it looks like. Any explanation?
Behavioral change from a neuroscientific angle is related to those mechanisms that we talked about in the beginning. So in my opinion, that you were interested in epigenetics and neuroplasticity as examples. So in my opinion, any behavior is not something esoteric. So, the way it's being studied now these days is we basically study the bodily organic correlates of behavior. And so what we know about behavior is that it's caused behaviors are caused, and behavioral choices and the actual processes are caused by physiological mechanisms in the body. And so we need to, in my opinion, any behavioral change, and to make it effective, we need to target, we need to keep in mind those mechanisms, and we need to try to at least try to target those mechanisms. So, for example, take advantage of the knowledge about epigenetics, what we know, what types of experience can influence the epigenetic mechanisms. So we can run tests to determine epigenetic states, and then influence it by experience. There are also other factors which are also related to physiology, which is motivation. You mentioned that when it's a personal experience, we tend to be more motivated. Exactly the same for behavioral change, because that's basically one of the biggest barriers in the beginning, that people are just not motivated. Even the tool that they are given, it's not interesting enough for them, even judgmental, or they don't find it inspiring. So motivation level has to be very high. That's also related to how motivation works, the whole network in the brain. And then what is very important for behavioral change is that repetitions, just like habits develop via many cycles of repetition, change needs to go through that as well. What we call one word for it is reinforcement. So it's basically make it more ingrained. We need to unlearn the old habits and the different components and learn new ways of coping and behaving. And then in the end, we need to be able to also maintain that. And then again, we need to understand how the whole system, the motivational system, and what went wrong and due to what earlier in life and so on, and incorporate those into a long-term treatment. Usually for mental health, almost every case needs a longer term treatment. It won't be resolved overnight. So this
sounds like the whole steps from the unlearning into the new, which is, I guess, the beginning. It's probably, from my understanding, one of the most challenging, because learning is something can be also difficult, but unlearning, it's really the point that I can imagine that troubles more people, right?
But you know why? Because it's learning. It's something that acquiring something that has never existed. And, we have freedom, and usually we like, as humans, we like freedom. We like to explore. We have curiosity and so on. But something that is already established, that's there already. And that tends to be stronger, everything that is established and something, the new experiences. So basically the effect of novelty is also, it's a concept from also behavioral psychology, neuroscience, that actually affects the brain and motivates. It's a huge motivating factor for humans. So that can be very inspiring, but we need to figure out what type of novelty is good for one individual. It's not the same for everyone.
Are there healthy and unhealthy novelty?
Like in the mental. That's an excellent question, because it's so when people study the underlying predispositions to addictions, actually what we call novelty seeking is a big factor. It's like a trait, a personality trait that we also know that has genetic determinants, and with certain genetic backgrounds, some people tend to be more novelty seekers. I am one of those, for example, and we know that people who have that background very often they have an increased vulnerability to addictions, because it's especially when we are young, teenagers and young people, curiosity and usually lower inhibition, so more they tend to be more impulsive, and so that novelty effect in the beginning is just experimenting and trying different things. So to your question, of course, if we just go out and spend our time exploring spend our life exploring all of our time and exploring drugs and experiences and, relationships and so on, then we neglect other areas of life. So in that sense, novelty is not very beneficial.
I never thought about it, but it makes sense. I mean, we are, the energy exploration. We're all about exploration. So because of this curiosity threat, and that's the good part, but that you have more risks than someone who is more comfortable with the same kind of environment, same people, where everything is known. So probably there's also, not probably, you're telling it's science.
Yeah, it's a
There's
balance.
less
Like,
risk.
like everything, we need the proportions, the right proportions.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's just like habits. So
Yeah.
have to achieve them.
I totally agree. And yes, said never reflect on this. So I thinking about physical and mental well-being now. That's something that I wanted to ask you as well. I know they are connected. We always talk and see as well, like everything is connected, like with physical, mental well-being. But how are they connected from a neuroscientific point of view?
Yes, the neuroscientific point of view is that actually something that is there is really no distinction between mental and physical. And this comes from, so you will understand when I explain, this comes from the modern knowledge when we study why we do certain behaviors and habits, why those exist. And the way we study it is we study how the body functions. And what this research has uncovered is that there are very usually physiological, physical, organic processes, mechanisms, biological mechanisms in the background driving all of these things. And so what we call mental or psychological, that's another word, is just as physical and physiological as let's say, blood pressure or blood sugar level and things like that. Because behavior, we talked about, the epigenetics and the genes functions. Those, for example, for the functioning of genes determine everything, how the whole body functions, how the whole body works. And eventually, behavior is just one of those things, what types of choices we make. Decision making, cognitive processes. So it's not esoteric at all these days. Even the way these disciplines are called, we have things like biological psychiatry, biological psychology. So this means that we always link it with the underlying biological mechanisms. And also, as I said before, as treatment interventions, we try to target those biological mechanisms and take advantage of that knowledge. So it's basically there is no distinction. It's just usually what we call mental is traditionally people associate, there's what we call feelings, emotions, cognitions, thinking, but all of that is also physiological. It's
That's
part of
super
the body.
interesting. Yeah, that's really, we always tend to give those separation definitions, but it's super interesting. Like you said it right away, there's no separation. Yeah,
It's a whole
really
system,
should.
the body system. It's like, you are familiar with this. I know that, the nervous system, cardiovascular system.
11, I think, on the overall 11 or 12 with so many, yeah.
And they are all part of the same body. Even I see sometimes even neuroscientists talk about I see it in podcasts, for example, they talk about, they always use this terminology, the brain and the body. I think that does not make much sense to me because, the body is just the biggest level, and the brain is just one organ in that body, and it's interconnected with everything else. And the way it's, the holistic, if you're interested in that, how that works, because these systems do not operate on their own individually. And so something goes wrong, let's say, just in the immune system, it's very, very, a big area of research these days, the connection between immune system and inflammation, how that can be related to mental health, that can influence mental health, that can cause depression, anxiety, even, vulnerability to addiction. And also we can figure out those problems in the interconnected systems and then target those and fix those, let's put it that way, and that will that is likely to help also make the mental health, the nervous system, and everything involved in mental health function better. That's why what
think
you
we
are
should
doing
talk more.
is
Yeah, we should talk more about it in general, right? Because many people, when we have a problem, that we go to a certain specialist or the other, we always look for something very specific exactly there, and the problem is probably completely in a different place. But since we separate everything and we don't really know or have this understanding, as you just explained, that the physical and mental well-being, it's so connected that there is no real difference. And that's the reason why many sicknesses and many diseases come from certain things like autoimmune diseases. It's still a world that we don't really understand if we try to explain it with the separation and silos of all the different ways. And the approach is very different. And that separates a bit the Eastern and the Western world. You were as well, you have experience in Asia, and I think they are a bit different in terms of the kind of approach. But I think having this understanding, at least the seed on our mind, that there is no separation, that it's all integrated, it would be already be helpful to live better.
But for the sake of, for example, testing, we do need to separate, this compartmentalization. It's a human cognitive style. Nature does not compartmentalize. That's what we just discussed, right? The whole body is a system. Everything is connected. But we compartmentalize and separate for the sake of understanding and being able to basically run tests. We can't just test everything all at once. So we need to break down. What we need, though, is a better integration of all these different things into a...
Thank you for integrating. Yeah, for integrating this, Henrietta. One other question on the way we could improve our approach to mental health in our society, in your opinion, or what are your thoughts on how we can, how we can do that, and also how this links to what you do, like how can do your service help better in what you're doing in this? Because I know you're very committed, and it's your life purpose as well, and business and life and everything together to have this better integration. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure. Yeah. So traditionally, one of the first things is that awareness and knowledge. When I for example, when I was growing up, part of the reason I struggled so much with mental health was because I just didn't know. There was no, information about it. These days, there is more, due to the research, many years of research and accumulation of knowledge, and then people take advantage of all the media, the internet, social media, and so on. So we have a much higher level of awareness. But we still need to eradicate a lot of stigmas that have been there is so much stigma associated with mental health, especially with something like addiction, that, it's the fault of the individual. People don't see it as a condition, as a, physical or, basically a health condition, but more like a moral failing or something like that. So we still need to improve. And we need to improve also, of course, the care system, because that's related to whole healthcare system. To be honest with you, I lived in many different countries, and I have not seen one single healthcare system that was very highly functional and really served very well the citizens of that country. And so there are many, many different ways. And so one thing is what we just said, that we need to make it more systematic. And so, for example, there are newer like subspecialties of medicine, such as lifestyle medicine or integrative, medicine. That's exactly the name suggests that the goal is to put this all together and study it all together and solve it all together. And also there are many. It's basically how the whole system, the care system, functions in the everyday. That it's very many people just don't have access to any help due to financial limitations. If they want to seek professional help, they don't have health insurance or their own money. They are just stuck, or they can use the internet. Now the technology helps a lot, so that's something that is the good side of technology. That there are many of these apps now that we used to say that don't look for advice from a good Dr. Google, because that's not good for someone who is not really highly educated in these things. But these days there are many these platforms, digital tools that can actually help. They are much better developed than the information. We just have to be very mindful of how we use that. And so it's basically think about the problem on a system level, and target it on a system level, and then integrate that in the formal, care system. Make it more. Funding is also very limited usually, where it's not only the person who wants the help, they cannot afford it, but even the providers or the researchers, like I used to be. We cannot, uncover all that really cool knowledge if there is no money for it. So that's also a big limitation, especially in mental health. It's hard to get funding for it. And so
if it's not a priority, right, where to put the money, then probably there is a problem because it looks like in the last years we more than before realize how our mental health it's crucial, fundamental. That's something that, as you said before, it was stigmatized. We didn't talk about it. So the awareness is kind of increasing, at least in what we are seeing around and hearing. But the rest needs to come as well in terms of putting more effort, more resources, and creating better systems. So I think like the points that you mentioned with this last question are very important, and I can totally really
One thing about awareness, though, is that I speak about this quite often. That why do we have so much? We talk about mental health crisis in the past decade and why that exists. And there are many reasons. Maybe we can discuss that in a different time. But just one thing, in my opinion, part of it is because we are just much more highly aware of this mental health in general. First of all, because there is more knowledge available, and it's integrated in our everyday lifestyle. Especially younger people are much more aware of the mental health, and that can also sometimes exacerbate some conditions such as anxiety. So that's again, it's just one of those things, finding the right proportions between
that's
awareness.
A very interesting point. Yeah, because with awareness it increases in the positive part, but it also can increase the fear and the anxiety of something that, since we don't define it, usually we don't understand, we scratch the surface, right? And at the end we probably see things where it's something else, or it's not there, right? In terms of, and I don't know, you said the crisis, right? Like we realize more. Was it different before? Because probably we just didn't talk about it, and it hasn't been very different, but we suddenly realized that we have a problem. And I don't know, I think, in my understanding, that's nothing modern, right? That's nothing modern. Probably it's as old as any other kind of issues that can trouble the human being. Nothing modern.
Although I like to argue that actually lifestyle is quite different now than let's say 20 years ago. So I'm old enough that I can compare. In my childhood, I did not have. I had at least anxiety. I tend to have more, and it's due to it's. And one thing that really has changed is we were talking about the technology. Technology has many it equips us with excellent tools, and everything makes things much faster. The drawback of that speed is that the expectations, and so we need to do everything because we have the tools. We need to use them and live this life, just being the connectivity also, that the internet, the social media, and all these different things, they did not exist 20 plus years ago. It was a very, very different world. And so, of course, in my opinion, human evolution is not able to catch up with the development of these technical solutions and the technologies. And so this creates also a gap of something that basically an empty space that we don't know how to cope with, and in the everyday, and to deliver, to be successful, and to always be on, and connect, and be productive, and so on and so on and so on, and at the same time be healthy. So I know you understand this because that's part of what you do, that find basically take care of ourselves as well. And so I think it's people don't do that these days, and it's just simply it's just in terms of the causes, all these different things we talked about, the biological mechanisms, epigenetics, for example, especially epigenetics, is very, very highly subject to all these environmental influences. Basically, we are not even aware of it, even when we are asleep. And now when we are talking,
yes,
changes how those imprints, those chemical modifications, chemical reactions, and that causes, that's big part. And of course then the other big problems with the economy, and the pandemic that we experience. But this is very local. But in terms of, I think it's more the actual lifestyle and the speed and the expectations and the technology integration. We need to evolve human brain. So
I
hopefully
think you
AI will
mentioned all
help.
of them. I think really at all levels, and that's, I mean, what else can we add to it? The potentially we had probably similar way of function, and now we have different reality and expectations. So I think
Yeah.
that's something that we forget.
Fortunately, we have mechanisms. Again, speaking of biology, we have mechanisms such as neuroplasticity. That's exactly for that. That's the purpose of that. That we can adaptability. That we can, learn all these new things relatively fast, and make mistakes, and then eventually figure it out. And so that's how we use our brains. But it just takes time. So maybe
Yeah.
we will see. It's unfortunately, probably we will not see what will be the state of this. If it will be a much better state, let's say in 100 years, 200 years, and so on. But
Who
I would
knows?
be very curious to see,
Just
if we
to see.
catch
I
up.
mean, we don't need to live 150, 60, 80, whatever, but I would also be curious to know what's going on later on. Probably the change will be so quick that we will see them. Who knows? Who
Yeah.
knows? Thank you for this explanation. It's super interesting. I have a bit personal question, not very personal, just a little
Sure.
bit. What's your superpower?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So I thought what I would describe as superpower. So first of all, I have this maybe one of my superpowers. Actually, when I prepared for this question, I did not think about it, but maybe one of them is that I don't usually see things in like black and white. So I always, when I approach something, when I try to even solve a problem, I try to I like automatically be able to see many different sides of an issue. And so this relates to the rest of the superpowers, which I think that what I consider superpowers is my superpowers, at least, usually have they function as a double-edged sword. So there are superpowers, but at the same time they can have also disadvantages. I give you examples. So one thing that people usually describe when they meet me, very often I get this: the intelligence and cognitive abilities and creativity combined with logical, rational processes, and putting it all together and solving problems. That was also a big barrier, for example, when I had my own addiction, because I thought that I knew everything, I would figure it out on my own. And for a long time, I just did not do. I just waited way too long because I did not trust others. I wanted to trust my own mind. So that's, that can be sometimes, and I see this very often, it's very commonly associated with, people who are intelligent, educated, things like that. Another thing that I like about myself is the what we call resilience, and ability to overcome really difficult challenges. And so it's not only the ability to overcome, but actually I like challenges. And so for someone who has, for example, a spiritual inclination, might think that maybe that's why I'm given these challenges, because addiction and other things, and we're just being around the world, and on my own, and very independently, and figuring things out. But that can, these things can also be and also I'm not afraid of tackling difficult problems professionally. Virtually all of my research projects, at least most of them, have been things that sometimes it can be challenging to get people to join, because they are big problems and difficult problems. But I like those things, and so uh, it's basically yeah. So it's how I deal with problem solving. And then the last one I like about myself generally is that I tend not to be so very strongly influenced by external expectations and social norms and traditions and conventions. So that's related to the others that I described. I like to figure things out and come up with my own solutions, my own ways of
That's
doing
everything good, well connected. I'm to list the last one you mentioned. I can see myself as well there, like that's good, because otherwise you are always, so when you influence, you're always living the ideas of someone else and probably also forgetting yours. So you have wonderful superpowers, Henrietta. I love them. And I like the different perspective of also a superpower can be a weakness, right? Just the example you gave. And I never thought about it. This is something
it's
that
just like dosage. It's like an experience, the drugs or the sugar or anything that we do. It's like the habits. It's very similar to that in a way that, there is the dosage, how much we do something that is, that we can use to our advantage. Too much is usually, too much of the same is usually not very good in the long run. And at the same time, how we use, the way, the quality, how we use these different things. So, for example, if I use my problem solving abilities to basically try to get away with my addiction, which I did for many years, and manipulate the environment around me because I want to have my cake and eat it at the same time, to put it that way. And I can use my cognitive abilities and just the neuroscience knowledge and everything to manipulate the environment and my own life. That's not necessarily
didn't
good.
work.
Yeah.
If sometimes you need to ask for help, right? And don't think you can make it yourself. So that's a great message. Thank you for this. I think it's a last question. It's a powerful message. The last one that I have for you or for us is, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I have a LinkedIn profile. I think that's how we met. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. Basically, I check every day and post things about mental health. Usually, for objective recovery, we will have a website up relatively soon. The way we don't have it public yet is because all the what we are doing still is doing in private beta testing and clinical studies and things like that.
Okay.
Once that's done, it will be available for anyone to use and launch publicly. And I have my email address, professional email address. So my website, the website will be objectiverecovery.com. And my email address is basically, maybe you can put it in the description. It's my name, Szutorisz, my name, at objectiverecovery.com at the moment. These are the best ways.
Of course, I will add it in the description so that if people want to connect with you, they know where to find you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Super interesting topics. I know that for each question, each topic, it could be a separate conversation, and I'm curious definitely to know more. So I hope to have you another time and do a different topic. This time we covered a lot of various ones. Thank you, Henrietta. It was great talking to you.
Thank you so much again, Kathy, for the invitation. I really enjoyed this conversation. Maybe next time we can have one specifically designated to the eating habits and lifestyle changes. I would have a lot to say, and we can get that, maybe the idea more deeply into the sugar problem and how that works. I would be happy to do something like that.